Good morning and welcome to Heartland Leatherworks. This morning we're going to be doing a real quick video on wet forming leather, and what we're going to be making is this pouch. This is actually a pouch for a light meter. A guy that works in the film industry contacted me and he wanted a pouch that he could put his light meter in. This is a piece of wood that I took all the measurements from the photos he sent me of his light meter so that I could make a form to wet form this leather. So let's go to the shop and wet form some leather. So we've already made a pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and kind of mark this up, and I'm going to sew it before I make it. It'll just make my life easier. So that's the plan on that. I'll go ahead and get it marked out. He's wanting double stitching, so I made this case a little bit wider, as you can see, so that we can account for the double stitching. And then we may end up trimming this down a little bit narrower as well. But since this video is about wet forming, we're not going to go into the stitching. I'm just going to do the layout. And if you guys are watching, this side's a little bit longer than this side on purpose because this side of this piece of the instrument is actually bigger than the other side, so that's why it's like that. So that's going to be the layout. officially ready for the wet forming, and we're going to go ahead and do that. I've prepared a little deal of water already, which is right here. So I'll try to get the camera set up and walk you through this. And then when you're wet forming, all we're going to do is just get everything in this thing wet. And you want it just as I'm going to do the entire leather. If you don't do all of it, it's going to discolor on you. So we want to get it on the inside. We'll come in here. Yeah, there's water down in there. So after you get it wet, we'll come in here and we're just going to damp off the leather. We're not trying to dry it. We just don't want water all over the place. And then I'll leave this towel up here. So here's our piece, and it should slide down in there a pretty good ways. And all we're looking for now is we're just trying to get everything centered up. And then this is all gonna And then, since we do have the little pieces that stick out, as part of the lens, you want to kind of form that going all the way up and out so that when you get ready to slide it in, it fits. It will actually shrink up some as it's drying, so we'll come back and check it periodically, about every 30 minutes or so. Alright guys, it's been a couple hours since we wet formed this, and I've just been letting it dry. As you can see, I had it flipped over holding this lid down, and basically you're just going to come in here and make sure that all your edges are still straight. We're going to periodically check that just to make sure that they're not drying out of sequence or getting crooked, but basically you want to try to get this to where it's straight. And again, one of the other things that I didn't talk about that I probably should have, when I'm wet forming, we actually dyed all this stuff yesterday, and I want that dye to get completely dry before you start wet forming. If the dye is still wet when you go to wet form, it'll sometimes run or mix or shift on you, shift the colors. So that's why it's basically going to take us 3 days to make this. We did the cutout and glue it all up and dye it the first day. Like I say, I went ahead and did the sewing. I sewed all the edges on what we're going to be wet forming today before we wet form, and just kind of clean up the edges. And then it's going to take an entire day for this to dry. I'll go ahead and I'll leave this just like it is with the form in there for probably another 4 or 5 hours, and then I'll pull it out. That way the inside of this leather can be drying as well. So that's Again, right now you just want to come back and check it about every hour or so and make sure that your edges aren't bending up or wilting or whatever you want to call it. We're just trying to keep it all straight. That way when it's dry, it's all straight. It's kind of your standard size belt, and while this is still wet, you want to go ahead and kind of form this belt loop so it'll be easier for your customer to get their belt in and out. And again, guys, those are some real quick tips on wet forming leather. Wet forming veg tan leather is a little bit different than rawhide. Rawhide would be a totally different video, but for veg tan leather, we're just going to use regular water. It doesn't need to be hot, it doesn't need to be cold, and you don't want to let this soak for a long time. The biggest deal on this is letting it air dry, and since we form this all with our hands, letting it air dry is much better. The leather will get stiffer and actually hold its shape. As you can see, I can pull this in and out, but it will hold it without the lid. And that's the way you want your leather to work, is when it's dry, it should actually hold your item, but you should be able to drop it in there. So with that, it should hold a little bit better than that. You want it to be able to drop down in there, but at the same time, you don't necessarily, if he takes off running, you don't want him to lose his tool. So that's gonna wrap up our wet forming veg tan leather. I hope you enjoyed our video. Thanks again, and may you have a blessed week.